And so the military was falling ill with polio. And what would they do when you signed up for the military? They would just spray you down with DDT. There's complete evidence of this. And everybody's seen the videos of the children being sprayed with DDT. And if you look at the symptoms of arsenic poisoning and DDT poisoning, it's very similar to what they consider poliomyelitis, polio.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here.
Right? Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
All right, Dr. Suzanne Humphries, I'm so excited to be sitting down with you. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
You've been one of the OGs in this fight for a long time, and you've been a hero of mine for a really long time. And I just want to say thank you for standing in the gap. You've taken a lot of arrows, haven't you?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I've taken a few. I guess I've got good armor as well.
Amen.
But I have to say, when you asked me to go on the pod, like I've seen you on social media and I've always liked what you said. And I feel like, oh, you're an ally. And then you asked me to come on the podcast and I said, yes, obviously. And then I was like, oh, I should just research this fellow and find out what he's all about. And so I did. And I saw that, that you're a chiropractor and that you're a social media disinformation person who spreads misinformation about vaccination. And so I should just tell you that if it wasn't for chiropractors, I probably wouldn't have survived walking out of the medical system because it was you guys that were actually there to catch me when I was literally like crumbling and falling apart and not knowing where I was going to turn next. Very emotional thing, actually, when I think back on it. And it was like Billy DeMoss and just chiropractors all over the world in Scandinavia that hosted me and just really helped me get back on my feet. And it's also chiropractors that corrupted me in the first place back when I was 12 years old, when my mother kind of woke up to the whole scene and started taking me to chiropractors back in the day when they would sit and talk to you for like a half hour to 45 minutes and polluted my mind with healthy information. And don't ask me how I ended up going to medical school, honestly. Like I absolutely should have gone to chiropractic school, but I was working in a medical school. And I realized how dumb the students were, and because I used to think that medical students were really, really brilliant people that I could never, ever be one. when they rotated through my laboratory, I was like, "Whoa, the emperor is completely nude here, and if they can go through medical school, I can." So that's kind of how I ended up going to medical school. But I guess that's what God wanted for me, but
Amen.
I really admire chiropractors. And when people call me today and they say, what should I do? And I say, go to chiropractic. Don't go to medical school. Go do something that's actually useful.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And, that means the world to me. And, I love Billy DeMoss. He's a good friend of mine. And, and I when you said that, it just rang a bell. I remember him. I watched a video of him adjusting you in the past. And and so it's just, it is, every path's different. God had a plan for you and he's using you in a mightily way. And he has used you, continues to use you and in a big way. So I just, I don't ever want you to feel like you made the wrong decision, but God is definitely using you in a powerful way. And so, it is a crazy world we live in, and the healthcare system is broken, and it's people like you and people like myself that are standing in the gap, trying to blow the whistle on all this corruption. But I do want to talk to you because I think you have so much wisdom in this area. You come from the medical world and the allopathic world. You see the issues here. I've listened to your lectures in the past, and I want to dive into some of that and kind of dissect some of that to get that information out for people. especially from your background, what you've seen, what you understand. And, we might be talking about some things that not everyone's going to understand with maybe immunoglobulins or antibodies, but just maybe simplify that a little bit. But going back from when you woke up, was it the chiropractor that woke you up in this area, or was it when you were in med school? When was the change for you?
Mm. I did actually write an autobiography called Rising from the Dead, and I go through this in great detail, but I'll summarize for you. The dead being the people I left behind in the medical system, by and large, 90% of them. Um, I went to medical school, and it was kind of like a half to three quarters of the way through that I was just kind of like a bit disgusted by the whole thing. But I was committed, and I felt like I needed to finish because I was already in a huge amount of debt. So I finished medical school, and then I thought, well, I'm not going to go to a traditional residency because I just didn't like what I was seeing. So I searched around, and I found this social medicine program in the Bronx, New York, that I went to. And that was another disappointment. I felt like, I'd learned to be a really nice doctor, but I didn't really feel like I had really good, solid information, ability to function in an intensive care scenario or anything like that. So then I decided to deepen my understanding and go into nephrology, kidneys. And so I got a lot of intensive care experience there, and I really enjoyed that. And I felt more competent at that point. And then I took an academic position because I still felt a bit insecure, and I wanted to, beef up my academic understanding. And so, I taught for a while, and it was a really good environment again. And then I couldn't pay off my debt. Academic positions, you have to already enter them with a little bit of money. Or, I was even single. I didn't even have a family to support, and I was struggling in Philadelphia. I couldn't even buy like one of the worst homes in Philadelphia. So I was offered a really handsome salary up in Maine, and I moved up to Maine for a while. And I was able to, I guess, really integrate my holistic understanding of things with my allopathic understanding of things in my own private office without any problems whatsoever. So I was helping people get off their drugs, and I was feeling a little better about things at that point. I had a little bit of influence into the medical students because it was a teaching center as well. And then it was, the whole vaccine thing came up in 2009. And, so here am I sitting with mountains of medical papers and books, and morons were telling me to shut up. And that's when I just decided that I had to get out. But I think I entered the medical school and that whole time from a very holistic perspective. I didn't expect that I was going to become a high-paid pharmaceutical technician that actually couldn't do anything except write prescriptions, make diagnoses, and send people on their way while their diseases deepened and deepened and deepened. That wasn't what I thought I signed up for. But that's what I got. And so it's just been, now I left in 2011. So it's been, a few years of really going out and learning what real health is, what real cell biology is, what biophysics is. And it's all there's always learning. And, these arrogant doctors, they leave medical school, they leave their residency, and they think they're all decorated and done. And they're still infants as far as I'm concerned. They still, they know almost nothing, and they're quite destructive if they don't understand that. So it's really humbling. The more we learn, the more we realize we don't actually know. and so I'm still in that state right now, but I feel like I have a bit more to offer people that come to me with, the same kinds of metabolic problems that came to me a long time ago with, that all I did was dispense drugs for.
Right. So I want to ask you and kind of dive into some of the history. I mean, one of the books you had a hand in is The Dissolving Illusions, and I recommend that to everybody. It's such a good book, and and basically, these diseases that we have vaccines for, they were already on their way out. And I know this. I mean, more than anybody. Especially in the medical field, when they don't understand the cause of something, they always want to blame it on a virus. And like scurvy was blamed on a virus, and I want to talk about maybe the history of polio, because this is something that everybody, especially the boomer age, is like you get on the debate on vaccines. They always go, well, "What about polio? You're going to bring back the iron lung, right?" and it's I've seen this and a lot of this propaganda that's coming about, and I and I love my in-laws, God bless them, but this is a topic that's always just polio. You're going to bring back polio, and so can you walk us through some of this history of polio?
Yeah. I can tell you that the polio chapter from Dissolving Illusions is circulating out there in PDF form for free, because we put it out a few years ago when, this crazy stuff started. Anyway. So you mentioned that the diseases were on their way out. And in some instances, the diseases were on a decline, but it was really the death rates that were gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have to look at are the disease incidence rates and then the death rates. And so the incidence rates, especially in terms of polio, have actually gone up since the 1940s, 1950s. And after the vaccine, the paralysis rates have gone up since the 1940s and 1950s. And so when you think about polio, you have to think, what is polio? And what were the definitions? And so it's very easy to just go, oh, Jonas Salk was a hero, and Albert Sullivan came up with the oral vaccine, and we don't see polio anymore. Woohoo, whoopee-doo, no more iron lungs. Okay, so that's kind of the dogma that circulates, and that I once believed as well, until I had to answer my own questions when I walked away and I was realizing that all vaccines are harmful, and that I never wanted to be in the same room with another vaccine as long as I live. And that's still how I feel. And so, what about polio was the question. It was the question that was thrown at me when I was telling people that I didn't want my intensive care kidney failure patients vaccinated with a flu shot before I even got to make a diagnosis. What about polio? I was just standing there going, what about polio? So it took me about 2 years to dissect polio and really have an understanding of what really went down in the 1940s and 1950s. And it's a very long, dark, ugly story that we could probably spend 6 to 8 hours discussing today. So it's really difficult to hash it down to something simple, but I'll do my best. And that is that polio was considered a paralytic disease that primarily affected children, but also affected adults. And there's evidence of supposed evidence of polio with short limbs back in the Pharaoh tombs, but my guess is it was extraordinarily rare. And then it became more common in the early 1900s, around the time when chemicals and injectables were brought into the public. And if you go out to, say, the South American Indian tribes that were basically killing anyone that came near the edges of their tribes, but some public health workers managed to get there. And this must have been a really interesting conversation, but they convinced these tribes to give them some fecal and blood samples. And what they found was that they had evidence of immunity to all 3 strains of polio, and no evidence of polio, no short limbs. They never had, dead babies, anything like that in terms of polio. So what was going on here? So the long and the short of it, my opinion, my educated opinion, is that polio is something that's probably a commensal that lives within us that doesn't cause harm under most conditions.
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a leader in the emerging wellness paradigm taking shape across North America and beyond. People everywhere are recognizing that the old sick care model, quick fixes, symptom chasing, and surface level solutions simply isn't enough. Ezra Healing is a part of the shift toward truly patient-centered care that prioritizes well-being, integrity, and a do-no-harm approach. At Ezra Healing, your whole lifestyle, rhythms, and patterns are considered to better support the interconnected systems of your body. They're focused on real solutions, long-term health promotion, and prevention, an evolving grassroots movement dedicated to helping individuals and families live healthier and more resilient lives. If you're ready for a wellness experience that puts humanity first, Ezra Healing is guiding the way. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now, back to the show.
And okay, there's all this controversy whether viruses exist or not. So let's just cut to the chase. I am not a virus denier, but I do deny that viruses are necessarily harmful because we have a virome, we have a bacteriome, we have a fungusome, and all these things can live on us, and they interact with each other, and they keep each other under control, actually. So if you want to look at what was always called polio, or the genetic sequences that were always considered polio, that's what I'm talking about. And so, breastfeeding started to fall away a little bit in the 1940s, and infant formula came in. And then we had the invention of the hypodermic needle in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s. We had the use of medications that contained mercury and arsenic that was supposedly good for children, good to inhale, good to mix with your tobacco. We had sprays on crops, lead arsenate, DDT. And so the military was falling ill with polio. And what would they do when you signed up for the military? They would just spray you down with DDT. There's complete evidence of this. And everybody's seen the videos of the children being sprayed with DDT. And if you look at the symptoms of arsenic poisoning and DDT poisoning, it's very similar to what they consider polio. So polio is a paralytic disease that was attributed to a virus. But the fact of the matter is that poliomyelitis is really the description. And what it means is inflammation of the gray matter of the spinal cord. And it can happen anywhere from the brainstem down. And the diagnostic criteria around the time of the invention of the vaccine was very broad because it was supposedly a public health maneuver to be able to get funding for people that had this paralysis. And so early on, if you had polio, you only needed to have 2 physical examinations within 24 hours affecting 1 or more muscle groups. And then you would be considered polio. And you would get your funding and whatever else happened after that. Then the vaccine came along, and the diagnostic criteria was changed several times. But the biggest impact was that they changed the time frame from 24 hours to 60 days. And the fact is that more than half of those people would have recovered within 60 days. And so, as doctors at the time, Dr. Bernard Greenberg, who was, a very pro-vaccine statistician at the time, he said, you would have eliminated the vast majority of polio without ever having a vaccine simply by the definition change that you gave. And so where's the iron lung now? Well, the iron lung is called a ventilator. And what is polio now? We have transverse myelitis. That's a famous, very similar presentation. Thousands of people diagnosed with transverse myelitis every year. If you go over to India, the paralytic rate is skyrocketed since the vaccination campaigns have begun. And in fact, the oral vaccine campaigns that they call pulse polio vaccine campaigns, where they go around and basically force children to have, sometimes up to 30 oral polio swallows. What you see is that the paralytic polio, I should say the rates of paralysis parallel the increase in the dosing. And then there's a doctor named Dr. Jacob Puliel who did that study. And then he went back and did another study when they decreased the rate of the dosing. And he found that the paralysis decreased again. And so we have that all outlined in detail in the 10th anniversary edition, because in the first edition, we didn't have that follow-up study. So, I mean, there's just so many little facts that I can throw out to you like that.
Right. Well, one question I have is, I've done a ton of research on this as well, and I just have so many questions. Like how did they know it was a virus? When they took the spinal fluid from the children that had the paralysis and they put it in the monkey brains, and then they just said it was a virus. How did they know?
Yeah, well, so now you're getting into, they didn't have the ability to genetically identify the viruses at that point. That didn't come until I guess the 1980s, 1990s. So what they would do is they would infect cells and look at the behavior of the cells after they were infected. So they would have, say monkey kidney cells plated out on a tissue culture dish, and then they would infect them. And so the virus deniers say, well, it was just poison, and poison can cause cell degeneration. Well, that's true. So the first vaccine was made out of an extract from fecal specimen from a child, I believe it was in Minnesota. And so whatever they found there that they inoculated and they didn't isolate in the sense of purifying that there was nothing else there, but that's what was used in order to make the vaccine. So whatever that was, and I can't tell you because I wasn't there. I'm a
Yeah.
medical historian. Okay. I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a virologist, but I
Right.
talk to a lot of geneticists and I talk to a lot of virologists. And so whatever was there were three types that they could identify by, how quickly they disintegrated under heat, or the behavior that they displayed microscopically. That's never been my focus in terms of how they did the typing. and
Right.
and but my focus has always been, where did polio go? What was polio back then?
Right.
So
Well,
today I know that there was this doctor named Dr. Herbert Ratner, who I actually ended up getting all of his office materials, and he was the Oak Park, Illinois public health director. He probably would be a very strong anti-vaccinationist today, but he wasn't back then. He was just cautious, and he saw what was happening with the injectable polio vaccine, which was causing paralysis. And so he didn't vaccinate his own children, and he held off on the Oak Park, Illinois vaccine until the oral vaccine was available. And so he saved a bunch of samples of the vaccine from the 1950s. And
wow.
then he gave them to various people. And one of them was Dr. Michelle Carboni, and another one was, what was this doctor's name? It'll come to me, but it was a more recent, it was in the 1980s or 1990s when he gave samples to these people. So Michelle Carboni, his focus was looking at SV40, simian virus 40, another, virus, if you will. And so by then we had better ways to genetically type. And Dr. Carboni is a world expert, always has been a world expert on SV40. And then the other sample was given to the second doctor, and he found other kinds of monkey viruses in the samples as well. So in some cases, the monkey viruses outnumbered the polio viruses. The SV40 outnumbered the polio viruses in a lot of vaccines. So, I would refer people to somebody like Dr. Kevin McKernan, who is somebody who can tell you precisely in a laboratory how he identifies viruses and how he types them and classifies them, because that's not my job. My job
Okay.
is to look at the clinical situation and what's happening and what the social situation around that was.
Well, Doc, how many cancers do you think were associated with the SV40?
I
I've
can't, I
heard that.
can't, I can't give you numbers. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that even before the polio vaccine in the 1954, there were vaccines circulating that nobody really knows how they were made, but presumably they would have been using monkey kidney tissue as well, because that was well known to be a good tissue culture medium. So I suspect that SV40 was injected into people before 1954. And I don't have any charts of cancer rates from the 1900s on, separating out different cancer rates. But we know that the cancer rates have increased. But you talk to people from the that had relatives in the 1940s, and that people were dying of cancer in the 1940s, but they were dying more in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. There was an explosion. Now we have an explosion of kidney cancer.
Yeah.
And I believe that the kidney cancer, when I look at the kidney cancer rates that have gone up, I believe that is related to SV40. And even as a transplant physician, kidney transplant physician, which I did a lot of kidney transplantation work, we always tested for some of these. They're latent viruses that can become active when one is immunocompromised. And so we were always concerned about that. We ignored SV40, but we looked at other polyoma viruses. So I think absolutely there has been an increase in cancer since injecting. And if you look at the smallpox situation, there was horrible skin diseases, and I suspect that there were skin cancers that evolved at that time, because that was a skin injection. It was basically putting cuts into the skin. And then once we got the hypodermic needle and started putting vaccines into muscle, I think that's when we really screwed around with not just altered the immune system, but we were bringing in basically we were cross species transferring God only knows what into humanity, and the
Right.
destruction began at that point. So what happened in 2021 to me was just another day in the office. It was a bad day in the office, mind you, but it really wasn't that different to what's been going on for so long, except that the technology now is far more sophisticated, and the intentional evil and corruption is far more prevalent.
So, so Doc, where's PETA? I think of,
Yeah.
we have these monkey cell lines, we have hamster cell lines, we have, there's taken cell lines. The MDCK, I think that the Medine Darby canine kidney
The
cell
maiden
lines,
Derby kidney cells, yeah.
the Cocker Spaniel cell
Cocker
lines.
Spaniel.
Yeah, where's PETA? Where are you guys at? People for ethical treatment of animals here. I think that's what it stands for here, or something like that. But it's like, it just baffles my brain. And if people knew that, if I go to the store and I'm constantly reading labels, all the people out there buying organic foods, people out there looking at the labels, if they knew that they saw the labels here of what's in these vaccines, I think it would cause maybe a revival overnight in the health field. I mean, it's like, people would absolutely refuse to say, even the insect cell lines. I mean, and you have to understand, people have to understand that there's got to be diseases that come from this. And this is why I always say, what seeds are to the farmer to bring a crop, vaccines are to big pharma to bring disease. I mean, and this, and I've heard you say that, you've seen that, we're vaccinating for these diseases, but they're bringing on diseases and autoimmune.
Absolutely. And, if people understood how primates were treated from the beginning, I'd say from the 1940s, 1950s, imagine these primates, these families, they live in families in Africa and in India. And, the poachers would go in and take whatever monkeys they could get their hands on. And they were brought overseas, usually on boats, and would land in New York Harbor, and then they'd be brought to labs. So here they are, they're taken away from their native diet, they're taken away from everything they own. They're primates, they're very sensitive, they're very emotional, they're very smart. And then they're put in cages, literally, and then they're having their skulls cut open and their brains implanted with God only knows what. And the torture and the people that handled the animals, could have told you how vicious these animals could get. Well, good for them. So where was everybody? There were literally millions of primates that were brought in the 1950s and 1960s for all this research. And then the monkey colonies were then, they started having them in America so they could make them have less disease. So if they had any latent, potentially latent problematic, whatever you want to call them, entities in their body, whether they're viruses or whatever they are, proteins, and then when the immune system starts to break down, they're all hell breaks loose because their immune systems are breaking down, just like what happens to us when our immune systems break down. And you hear this, like, I worked in a lab and I was like, what are those dogs? What's with the dogs? There were beagles in the labs. I never looked at them because my heart couldn't have withstood it. But gosh, even the rats and the mice, like there was one day where I had to euthanize probably 200 white mice, and they couldn't we couldn't use ether, which is what we normally would have used. So we had to just take them live and just break their spine. So you just put pressure between the neck and the body. You need that much. As a chiropractor, you would understand that. And they just die instantly. And I just look at this body, this pile of mouse bodies. It's horrendous. I wonder if it's really worth it's the benefit to humanity.
Right.
With what we're doing to these animals. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Definitely not anymore. I think that we should experiment on humans. Really, and I've got a few in mind that I would put on the top of the list. Yeah.
Right. I mean, arguably, I think we are the guinea pigs to these people, with these vaccines, what they're doing. I just wonder what kind of, I always said too, you have kids today, some of these kids think they're furries and they literally believe that they're a cat or a dog. And to me, it seems so, it's just like a mental illness, a mental disorder. But I always wonder what kind of epigenetic influence do these ingredients have on the developing nervous system to maybe think that these kids are really thinking that and believing that.
Absolutely.
I just
yeah.
So
Well,
it just makes you wonder.
we focus a lot on the immune system and what the ill effects can be, like allergies and cancers. But yes, I can't tell you, you've probably seen this too. How many times have you heard of a child who got vaccinated and just started, a baby would just start to push the mother's breast away, didn't want breast milk anymore after they were vaccinated? Like, what the heck is up with that? Like, they fed normally until they got jabbed and everything started to go wrong. During Gardasil, we saw, I think, demonic entities entering these teenagers. They just would shift overnight. So I think that there's a lot of stuff spiritual that can go on with vaccination, absolutely epigenetically that can go on with vaccination, and then biologically, directly altering the immune system. And it's never a gamble worth taking. Never, never, never freaking ever. Like, I got a message from this really nice doctor just the other day. And it's actually on my X channel right now. And he asked about the yellow fever vaccine because his son was 17-year-old going to the Amazon. And I'm just like, my answer is always the same. No vaccines ever. They're never worth it. And of course you can say, well, yellow fever is a terrible disease. Well, yellow fever vaccine is a terrible vaccine. Talk to people who have got it. I believe you need more than one dose. Like, my focus has always been on infant vaccines because I was like, my goal was to save babies. It wasn't to save 17-year-old teenagers. I care about that now, but in the beginning it was about babies.
Amen. Yeah.
And so what are the people that are living in the Amazon? What are they doing? Are they all getting jabbed multiple times all the time? Is it that deadly? Does nobody know how to treat yellow fever? Do people not travel with a travel bag that's got what you need when you're traveling? Oh, okay. What about Japanese encephalitis? What about, now they've got malaria vaccines? Now you can do hepatitis A, hepatitis B before you go away. And okay, you might seem to be perfectly fine after you get your travel vaccines. I cannot tell you how many people come to me today, healthy people. They were healthy. They didn't, not chronic diseases, anything like that. Out of the blue, these healthy people ending up with some of the most vicious cancers. And then they go, oh yeah, well, I had a slew of these travel vaccines, man, when I was like in my teenage years, in my 20s. It's like, okay, and now you've got cancer and you've got autoimmune diseases. Has there ever been any study to look for that? No, there has not. So if you want to take that gamble because you think yellow fever is going to kill you, go for it. But there might be a small chance that vaccine could prevent you from getting yellow fever and that you could not get cancer later. But that's your gamble to take. I wouldn't take it.
Yeah, right. I'm right there with you. I mean, I just, it's funny you said that because I literally had someone asked me that last week, if they should take that same vaccine they're traveling. So it's kind of funny. It's not funny, but it is funny at the same time. But it just, my answer is always the same as well. I mean, we're very much like-minded in that area. I mean, I got a haircut yesterday, Doc, and the lady, you'll get a kick out of this. She was cutting my hair. We got on the topic of, health and issues and different things. And she had no idea of my stance and where I come from. But she was telling me about her daughter and she was asking me some health questions because she started having seizures. And they started last August. And I said, okay, how old is she? She's 6 years old. Okay. And, did she get her kindergarten shots? And she said, yes. And I said, did she get them? And she said, and I said, well, how did she get the seizures before the vaccines or after? She said about a week after the vaccines, she started having these seizures. And I said, did your doctor ask or say anything about maybe the correlation there? And she said, no, the doctor said absolutely not. There's no correlation there. And it just baffles my brain that, and the mother believed that. The mother didn't even question it.
Yep. Happens all the time. Happens with autism as well. Oh no, the doctor said that the autism has nothing to do with the vaccines. Oh well, the doctor's God. The doctor must be right. The doctor's never read a darn thing about vaccination, and all they've been told is by the likes of Paul Offit and the gods from above that never to listen to the likes of us and don't even read what we have to say because we are destroying the health of humanity and vaccines are the answer. And that's it. That's as simple as that.
And I think you hit the nail on the head that this is spiritual. It's so spiritual. And, what did we see during COVID? You had in 2019, they took out, I'm sure you've seen this, the vaccine summit. They took out God. They took out, in God we trust. And they put in vaccines we trust.
Yeah.
And this is
and the 11th commandment. Remember that one? That was Jacobson. Jacobson, the editor in chief of Vaccine, the 11th commandment, thou shalt get your flu shot.
Oh, yes, right. And so, yeah, and I think as a Christian, people, we need to be on high alert here and expose this. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at, I saw a funny meme, and it had a witch like stirring this big pot, and it had all the ingredients of, like the monkey cell line and all these things. It's just reading the ingredients of a vaccine, and it sounded like a witch's brew
Yeah.
potion. And the reality, I think you're right that there might be some demonic type things. I mean, Satan is alive and well here, and I think that he is behind a lot of this, pushing this. I mean, the amount of deception and the lies. I mean, God hates lying. He says that he hates lying, and and I was just talking about the amount of lies that surround this industry is like an onion. It just you have to constantly, it's layers upon layers upon layers of lies. And it's and so it's just exposing all these different layers because it runs deep. It's 200 300 years of deception, and the smallpox. This is a topic I want to talk to you about because I was reading about this, how, and I'm not super knowledgeable in the history of the smallpox, but and I want to talk to you about that. But there was a you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was the horse hawks that was producing this saliva, or the secretion of the gland, right? And the farriers would get a pox, and weren't they taking that fluid and injecting that right into these kids? Is that right? I'm not sure on that, but
We'll be right back after a word for our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Ezra Healing, a place devoted to renewal and deep-rooted well-being. Ezra Healing supports individuals and families in soothing the nervous system, releasing accumulated stress and trauma, and restoring the body's God-given ability to repair and thrive. Their method is gentle, discerning, and grounded in honoring how the body was created to function. With steady guidance, thoughtful education, and practical resources, they come alongside each person to foster safety, resilience, and whole person healing. If you're seeking a space to breathe, rebalance, and truly heal, Ezra Healing offers a powerful path forward. To learn more, visit them at www.ezrahealing.com. And now back to the show.
Yeah, if you want like some real good witchcraft, look at the history of smallpox vaccination. I mean, sorcery at its best, because it could only have been sorcery, because there's no way that the actual concoction that was in that vaccine could have prevented anything. And what always amuses me is that this is the one vaccine that eradicated a disease. How funny is that? So they say. Well, this is their one success. Well, you have to know it's all one big joke when you read what was in it. So yes, so it was a cow, actually the udder of a cow, that would develop a pock. And then there was a rumor that the milking maids would get that if they were inoculated, that's what it was, that if they got the lesion on their hand, that they later would not be susceptible to smallpox. Only problem is that wasn't actually true. But don't let that stop a rumor. And a guy named Edward Jenner, who wasn't even a doctor, who had the blessing of the king to go ahead and start developing an answer to smallpox. Smallpox was a disfiguring, problematic disease back in the day. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it wasn't like a walk in the park. It's like whooping cough today. Like I saw my first case of whooping cough and I was like, darn, I know why they wanted a vaccine for that. It's nasty. Too bad the vaccine didn't work and it's created mutant strains. Okay, back to smallpox. So that was the initial vaccines used cow, and vaca in Spanish means cow. And so that's where the word vaccine comes from. So, but what happened later is they just decided to just have a great time taking some pus off of the hooves of a horse, and it was called horse grease when they were infected. Sometimes they used goats, sometimes they used rabbits, sometimes they used buffalo, sometimes they used cadaver of human. And they would mix any combination of that depending on where in the world it was, and then they would add glycerin, and they had the audacity to call it pure lymph and make a cut into a baby's arm and put that in there. And so the anti-vaccine movement was born then, and it was quite a powerful anti-vaccine movement back then. And for some reason, the mythology around vaccination has been extremely heavily protected from the very beginning. There was never a time when the powers that be were like, oh, yeah, this is terrible, we need to stop. It was always a struggle. And in fact, when the great demonstration happened in Leicester, UK, in the 1870s. It took 7 years after that, after this huge demonstration. It literally took 7 years for the red tape, so that there was no more mandate in the town of Leicester. And the prediction was that everyone in there was going to start a bonfire upon the earth, and smallpox was going to rip everybody to shreds. And in fact, unfortunately for those people that were saying that, the health rates increased, the death rates decreased for smallpox, and they had to eventually get rid of that vaccine because it was such a joke. But there were people that did look at it in the 1950s under microscopes, and they found that there was heavy bacteria and fungus contamination of it. In some cases, far more bacteria than even, whatever you want to call viruses. And it's all, so we write about this in the both versions of Dissolving Illusions. And there was a researcher named, I think it's QI, however you pronounce that. And they did a genetic analysis on the dry vax, which was the wonderful, safe vaccine that was given in modern days. And they found that it was what's called a quasi species, meaning it wasn't anything that you could attribute to any one species, that it was a mixture of all different types of animals in there. And that shortly after that, there was an order for all remaining dry vax to be destroyed on the planet. Now, of course, it wasn't, that they're still going to be around. And now we've got new vaccines against smallpox. And they tried to deploy that against us in 2003 after, they thought that there was going to be some sort of a bioterrorism. It was another one of those tabletop exercises trying to come to real life. But fortunately, there were a few doctors around, like Dr. Thomas Mack, who was, boots on the ground in the 1940s and 50s, and was like, hold this. What people are saying is absolute rubbish, and it's not that easily transmitted, and it's easily treated, and let's just stop this and don't deploy the vaccines. And so they didn't. But yeah, it's a long, crazy story regarding the smallpox vaccine. But what amazes me the most is just how heavily protected the practice of vaccination has always been, and how persecuted doctors who've woken up and said, "Wow, I regret the day that I ever gave my first vaccine to anybody." And they've been, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You tell a lie big enough, long enough, and you repeat it enough times, people are going to believe it. And that's why, again, they're protecting this lie. They know they're lying, so they're protecting it. And it's it's criminal, it's evil. And I think evil hates being exposed. So that's, you talk about chiropractors. D.D. Palmer, the founder of chiropractic, he wrote about vaccinations, and this is why a lot of people are like, oh, chiropractors, we shouldn't be speaking on them. And I'm like, no, this is, we actually should be speaking on this. And Didi even said that these are blood poisoning concoctions, and no one will vaccinate any member of my family unless they do so over my dead body. And I feel I have those same convictions. And,
yeah.
And so it's.
How old are you?
I'm 28. Just kidding. I'm not 20. You shouldn't laugh. Don't laugh at that. No, I'm 43.
43. So you're a relatively young chiropractor. What were you taught in chiropractic school?
Well, I grew up my dad was a chiropractor, so I was never vaccinated, and my siblings were never vaccinated. And my dad, he shined the light on a lot of the vaccine topics. And it honestly, Suzanne, when I was in chiropractic school, I was actually blown away of how many chiros were for vaccination.
That's right. Yeah.
I about fell over.
You would have been in the era where things were shifting, where your dad would have been in the era where it was taught in chiropractic school that vaccines were a absolute disaster for human health. And I had a chiropractor in the state of Virginia, and I asked her the same question. She's actually about your age, maybe a little bit older. And she said, and she went to the one in South Carolina, Sherman College. And she said, she goes, yeah, I didn't ever think anything about vaccines, but then I was taught in chiropractic school that they were just horrible. And that's when I woke up. And so the vaccine industry cottoned on to that part of they were losing a lot of profits because the chiropractors were educating people. And in fact, here's an interesting story, is that The first person to ever mention a problem with vaccines to me and introduce me to a non-vaccinated child was a mother who 20 years before I met her had a visit at a chiropractor, and in passing he just said, "Are you ever going to have children?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Just don't vaccinate them. The vaccines are really problematic." And she took that in and she simmered it for that many years. And when her children were born, she did the research and didn't vaccinate them. And it was that one little comment that
Right.
chiropractor made to that woman that helped create who I am today, to make the mess that I've made of the practice of vaccination. So never underestimate what your little comments can have. And so you might not underestimate it. And certainly the vaccine industry and the powers that be and the demonic entities on this planet don't underestimate the power of the truth in a little word in passing like that either, because it's forbidden in many chiropractic schools to say anything like that. And you're mandated. So I tell people, go to chiropractic school. I can't necessarily say that anymore, because I know up in Canada, they're mandated to get vaccinated before they go to chiropractic school. And I did a talk a few years ago at the WAVE conference, and I showed all the schools that are requiring vaccination. And that I did a talk at, what's that college in California that hosts the WAVE. And
Oh, yes. Yep. I know what you're talking about.
yeah,
Is it, there's a Palmer branch in Florida, but there's also
no.
there's
Life
Life.
chiropractic. Yeah.
Yep.
I did a talk there because I was invited by some of the students, and the signs that were describing my talk upcoming were all ripped down and vandalized. And the students that were hosting me were abused pretty significantly for that. And that's now like 10, 15 years ago. So the chiropractic has been very, very heavily infiltrated by vaccine interests, and it's certainly not what it used to be. And it's not a safe place to send people. No, there's no safe place. Even I attended homeopathic college in the UK, and there's so many homeopaths now that are fully in favor of still doing vaccination and then just doing their other remedies afterwards, or doing homeopathic vaccination, which I think is completely absurd and silly as well. But if you have to replace it with homeopathic, okay, that's still better. Yeah, but the whole world's been pretty much taken over by the medico-political vaccine industry.
Right. If you're a homeopathic doctor pushing vaccinations, it's like an oxymoron. I mean, it really is. There's a contradiction there, and that's, but it's funny you mentioned Life. I just got asked to speak at Life here. I've been speaking there, I think it was the 6th time. And every time I go there, I actually just blast vaccines. So they're coming around. I would say it might ebb and flow, but I'm not lecturing there, but I am. They just come and ask me to speak as a guest speaker there, so I pray it's coming full circle. But
Yeah.
Doc, I really value just your wisdom that you bring to the table. I'm just so thankful that you've been generous with your time here, and I want to ask you, there's a lot of parents that are listening to my podcast about, they're new parents. They might be fearful. They might, they might be on the fence on vaccines. I want to give you the last minute here to speak directly to those parents.
Well, my advice to those parents is always to talk to people like your father, and to talk to people like you, people who have lived their entire life non-jabbed, who have had children that weren't jabbed. My other piece of advice is to read a book called Vax, Unvax, or Non-Vax. I forget how they put it. Brian Hooker and Robert Kennedy's book, which goes through the vaccinated, unvaccinated studies. And read Robert Mendelssohn's books, who was an anti-vax doctor from the 1980s, who wrote some really good books called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. Because what you have to do, because if you don't vaccinate your child, you're going to have a very healthy child. Okay, they're going to be way healthier than their counterparts that are vaccinated, and you're going to notice that whether it's within your own family, kids that you already vaccinated, you have newer, younger kids that you haven't, you're going to see the difference straight away. But as they grow older as well. And they're going to stick out like a sore thumb because they're so healthy. And that's one of the things that woke me up, was looking at a Steiner school population and going, whoa, like not only are these kids creative and brilliant and bright and happy, but they never had antibiotics in their life. I never knew it was possible to go your whole life without antibiotics. That was an absolute revelation to me when I was about 40 years old as a doctor already. So I think your chances, look, it's always about, life is a gamble. If you're born, once you make it to being born, and that's a total miracle, everyone's afraid of dying. But the fact that you were ever even born in the first place, if you know what had to take place, how many trillions of events had to take place to get you into this world, you've already beat the odds. So don't ruin it by vaccinating, and realize that every step we make, there's a risk. And you just have to choose what the wisest option is. And in my opinion, my very, very educated opinion, the wisest option is to never take a vaccine, to never give a vaccine. Now, let me say that I also believe that newborn babies should not be taken on airplanes. They should not be taken out to coffee clubs. They should not be taken to parties. They shouldn't be groped and handled by every Tom, Dick, and Harry. I think that babies should be at home. And if people want to come visit, that's fine. But they shouldn't be out in public, because there is contagion. There are problems that can happen, and it's undesirable until that baby's about 3 months. After 3 months, I feel pretty confident I can handle just about anything: whooping cough, measles, whatever comes with that baby. But before 3 months, it's very risky. And if you're not going to vaccinate, please make sure that you do your best to have a normal vaginal delivery. And if you even can't do that, please breastfeed exclusively for 6 months, because that's how you're going to build your child's immunity. Go watch my Infant Immunity series that's now on Odyssey. It's a 4 or 5 part series that's loaded with documented information, and you can feel more confident. And confidence increases with knowledge. If you're just sitting there going, oh, I don't know what to do, well, figure out what to do by reading something. Read both sides. I'm not going to tell you to only read my side like the pro-vaccine people do. So think about why that might be. I'm not afraid of their side getting into your head. They're terrified of my information getting into your head. Why? Because they're going to lose out. That's why. So education is really, really important. So please do watch my infant vaccine series and read as widely as you can, and resources that I've already given you. And talk to parents that have already done it. Find groups online. Talk to people who have already raised children, that they're in their 20s and 30s. Find out what they did, because it is what the biggest risk is if you don't vaccinate, is going into the medical system, and the abuse that you're going to take if you end up in a conventional medical system because your kid stepped on a nail or cut themselves, or, usually it's something like that, some traumatic event. You end up in an emergency department usually, and you just have to say, look, I'm not here about vaccines today. I'm here because my child's bleeding, or they have a broken bone. And you have to be able to stand up for yourself with confidence.
Amen. Well said. Doc, where can people find you, and where can people find this series?
So if you go to my X channel, that's where you can get the easiest access to the series. So my X handle is DRSUZANNEH7. And at the very top of my homepage, there is a link to my Odyssey page. And if you get to the Odyssey page, just put in it's all there. I've got like 6 pages of videos there that should be enough to keep you busy and educate you and make you feel very confident on how to deal with diseases when they come up, and how to understand the whole process of vaccination. If people understood infant immunity and how it develops, you would never want to give a vaccine, because the vaccination actually thwarts the normal development of an infant immune system, which is why non-vaccinated children are far healthier in every way possible. So that's one way to find me. Dissolvingillusions.com is where you can find Roman, my co-author, myself, everything we've written. And I've got my own website, which is under construction now, but that's drsuzanne.net, DRSUZANNE.net.
We will have links at the bottom of our podcast to find Dr. Suzanne. Go follow her on X. Go support her work. She's been one of those OG doctors that had stood in the gap, has taken a lot of arrows. Dr. Suzanne, how can we pray for you?
Thank you. Prayers are welcome at all times. I'm looked after. God looks after me every step that I take. So while prayers are welcome, that's great. But just know that I have no doubts, because I am living evidence that God exists.
Amen. Well, we'll continue to pray for protection over you, to watch you, and just to continue to be the lamp at your feet. Thank you so much for your time. Please like and share this podcast. Share this. You have someone that that might be expecting, share this podcast with them. You know, like Suzanne said, just a whisper, just that little passing made a ripple effect. It goes back to what B.J. Palmer said. He said, we never know how far reaching something we may think, say, or do today will affect the lives of millions tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
You can't underestimate the power of just something small like that, because your voice matters. Thank you guys for all the support for this podcast, all the love that you've given to this podcast. Please like and share. God bless you guys. And thank you, Dr. Suzanne.
Thank you.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be, right, to be wearing gloves, a face shield, a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?